Hey there, I'm Mr. Terry. I'm a high school history teacher. Welcome back to another History Teacher Reacts video. As you can tell, I am ready to go to fight and become one of the most feared warrior groups in history. I've got my fire wolf. I've got my hard hat. I'm ready to go because that is what the title of this video is from Simple History. The most fearsome warrior groups in history. So before we start, who do you think should be on this list? I don't know what they're going to put, but let's find out together. So groups that come to mind right away for me would be like the Mongol army, maybe the Spartans. Got to put the Romans up there. So let's see what they got. Our original video link is down below. All right, let's learn about this together. All right, here we go.
The most feared warrior groups in history. Mankind has always been involved in warfare and fighting of some sort, right from the very beginning of time. During the countless conflicts,
especially, by the way, they say warfare increased historically when we started conducting agriculture, when land to be, fertile enough and to have enough native plants. Once we started converting to that and then became land competitiveness took a whole new level than even our hunter-gatherer ancestors.
That have raged across the globe.
Yes, farming created warfare.
There are some groups that have carved out a reputation for ferocity, skill, and deadliness. These are a few of the groups you definitely wouldn't want to face on the battlefield. The Arditi. By the First World War, the time of the warrior was over, replaced by the age of the soldier, a small cog in an ever-industrializing machine. There were some units, however, that still embodied the warrior ethos well into the modern era. In order to break the stalemate of the trenches, Italian military chiefs formed a new unit designed to act as shock troops to seize enemy positions.
All right. Okay, I'm laughing because, I just imagine they're like, this is the most fearsome group ever. And then you see these guys that are just slap boxing.
Tactics that were aggressive and audacious, bordering on reckless. Known as the Arditi, which means the bold ones, this unit was composed of volunteers, often from the Alpini or Bersaglieri mountain troops. And unlike the stormtroopers of Germany and Austria-Hungary, were not considered infantry, but rather a separate branch of service. Their units were much smaller than typical infantry ones, made up of just 4 officers, 41 NCOs, and 150 men. Like most stormtroopers, they relied more on speed and the element of surprise to achieve their objectives. It was here that the similarities ended. Though they did have access to modern firearms, such as a lighter version of the standard Carcano 1891 infantry rifle, the Moschetto carbine, as well as machine guns and flamethrowers. Their main armament were the noisy Thevenot hand grenades, which were intended more to disorientate the enemy than to kill, sometimes carrying as many as 25 grenades each. They also carried a lethal combat dagger. This knife was so iconic that they were often depicted in propaganda posters clenched between Arditi's teeth as they were throwing their grenades. Their main tactic would be to advance under the cover of an artillery barrage, which hopefully kept the enemy pinned down and unable to return fire. Once they were close enough, the artillery would cease firing, and the Arditi would throw their grenades at the still hunkered down enemy, tricking them into believing the barrage was still going on.
Okay. These guys are actually, what makes them fearsome is they're actually just insane. Imagine just going through no man's land. We all know about how crappy no man's land was and why it was called no man's land. And going in there, I don't care if you're wearing a little metal breastplate, that's not going to do stuff against a machine gun. And you're just running until you're in throwing distance for your grenade. So what made them fearsome is that they basically just were not scared of dying.
Before the dust settled, the Arditi would then leap into the trenches, engaging in hand-to-hand fighting. Their small knives gave them a tremendous advantage over their foes, who were wielding cumbersome long-barreled rifles with bayonets. Their tactics were a resounding success. The first known Arditi assault occurred on August 18, 1917, along the Isonzo front.
Then why didn't the Italians win?
They caught the Austro-Hungarian enemy by surprise and captured 500 soldiers and 8 machine guns while only suffering minimal casualties. Because of their elite status, they were transported by train or truck rather than having to walk long distances like regular infantry.
So were able
to carry lighter loads instead of the heavy haversacks, increasing their speed and mobility. They also received higher pay, did not have to serve in the trenches, and overall had better accommodations.
You don't have to serve in the trenches, but you have to run between them. Which one are you going to take there? What would you rather be, a general infantryman or one of these Arditi?
Was also a bonus system where they would receive financial rewards for capturing enemy soldiers, the price varying based on the prisoner's rank. This came at a cost, though. Because of their lightly equipped nature, they were devastating on the assault, but lacked the ability to hold the ground they had taken.
Yeah, that makes sense.
It was not unusual for the Arditi to sustain 30% casualty rates during their missions.
Ooh.
But this is not unexpected from a unit whose motto is, "We either win or we all die." Hey everyone, it's Chris.
Hey Tim.
You're probably used to hearing me
What up,
during
Chris?
our advertisements, but now I want to talk about something a little bit different. Every video we create is more than just content. It's a blend of research, creativity, and passion for history. We do it because we believe in the power of history, its lessons, its stories, and its ability to connect everyone.
Like what I do.
Sometimes the reality of operating a YouTube channel presents challenges, like the occasional demonetization, which impacts the ability to produce the content that we all love. Now we're looking at you, our amazing audience, to ask for your support in keeping this channel, our shared passion for history, alive and thriving. We're inviting you to join us on Patreon and contribute to the ongoing creation and distribution of our history content.
Guys, free content's going away.
You're doing more than just supporting our content.
Just so you know.
You're becoming an integral part of a community dedicated to preserving and promoting history. Remember, every bit of support
with the cuts YouTube takes and people taking
learn more about how you can
using
help,
ad blockers and all that stuff. Plus,
thank you as always for
history, our videos getting
the Gurkhas.
Limited for advertising because of the content.
Name is derived from the town of Gurkha in central Nepal.
You need to support your content creators. So
became the
support these
of the
guys.
whole of Nepal after conquering the neighboring principalities, uniting them into one strong empire. The warriors from these diverse regions became collectively known as Gurkhas. In 1814, a British expedition to Nepal met the Gurkhas in battle and were impressed by the skills and ferocity they exhibited. Likewise, the Gurkhas had a mutual respect for the British, and when the conflict ended in 1816, a clause was included in the treaty allowing Gurkhas to be recruited into the East India Company Army, which eventually integrated into the British Army.
Would they then just be considered sepoys? The British loved to and preferred to rule their empire indirectly. To be honest, they had to. They're a small country, and they, had colonies that might consume 25% of the world's population at its time. They completely relied upon locals for both their military strength and their political will. So they would find people loyal to them politically, and of course give them a lot of benefits in return for, maintaining some autonomy, but still often doing the bidding of the British. And then for the military, they don't have the army size to defend their their empire that is 25% of the world's population. They also required locals. So recruiting from locals, like in India, they called them sepoys. They were could be Muslim, they could be Indians, but they would serve in the military, and that was a major part of their forces.
This was the beginning of one of the greatest ever partnerships in military history. Over the centuries,
sepoy might just be considered Indian, though. Let me know if you know that. Could Nepalese people be considered that?
Including several wars in Central Asia during the Victorian era, staying loyal to the British Empire even during the Sepoy Mutiny, and being among the first to be sent to quell any trouble in India or the tumultuous region in what is today Pakistan and Afghanistan.
The Sepoy Rebellion almost cracked the British Empire. It was a rebellion that started from sepoys, so that means Indians, and that served in the British military, who rebelled against the issuing of the new Lee Enfield rifle, which used the greasing of animal fat for its cartridges, which was offensive because you end up biting cartridges, right? You end up biting the cartridges, and coming to contact with animal fat that would be used for grease. Well, animal fat is, depending on the animal, is offensive to both Hindus and Muslims. Okay, whether it be pork or beef, and there was a kind of a rebellion against that ended up morphing though into kind of a nationalist revolution that sought to eventually it grew and snowballed to a fact of a revolution trying to get rid of the British out of India. Now the British were heavily invested in India, way more than they were, say, in their 13 colonies in America, and put down that rebellion in quite bloody fashion, actually. So it ended up failing. And actually, what happened as a result of that, the British ended up ruling India even harder. They actually took away the indirect rule I was just talking about and put the British crown over rule of India, and did that all the way essentially till the end of the World Wars, when India got its independence.
In the 20th and 21st centuries, Gurkhas have fought in both world wars: Cyprus, Borneo, the Falklands, and also Iraq and Afghanistan in the global war on terror. The weapons used by the Gurkha forces have changed over the centuries, from flintlock muskets to modern firearms. But one consistent part of their arsenal is the famous kukri knife. This 15 to 18-inch long curved blade is carried by all Gurkhas and has been used on many occasions against foes unfortunate enough to be within their reach. According to some, there is a belief that once drawn, a kukri cannot be resheathed until it has tasted blood, even that of the owner, though...
They say in self-defense or something, when you're using a gun, don't pull it out unless you intend to use it as well. But now I don't think like a moral obligation, like, sorry, I pulled it out, maybe it happened on accident, I've got to kill you now, sorry.
This is an exaggeration, and the knife is more likely to be used for food preparation than bloodletting. By most accounts, Gurkhas are friendly and affable when not on the battlefield, giving them the moniker of the Happy Warriors, though when in combat, they become implacable foes. Their motto, "It is better to die than be a coward," has proven true time and again. Over the years, Gurkhas have earned 13 Victoria Crosses, the highest award for bravery in the British military, and countless other decorations. Today, Gurkhas are still an integral part of Britain's military, with large numbers also serving in the Indian military. It is certain that in the future, their enemies will always tremble at the sound of their battle cry, "Ayo Gurkhali," the Gurkhas are upon you. Zulu.
That was cool. I don't know much about that specific unit, so that was really enlightening there. Hopefully I was able to add some context of just how the British use this type of system, repeatedly, and relied on it. There's no British Empire without this type of indirect use, and well, not indirect use, but recruiting, these people. Zulu warriors. Okay, good pick. Good pick.
Warriors.
Let's get down to Africa.
19th century, under the leadership of the powerful King Shaka, the Zulu people
Shaka
forged
Zulu.
one of the most...
Also, one of my favorites to be in Civilization Revolution. Some I haven't streamed for a while on my gaming channel, Mr. Terry Gaming. I need to go back. I love the early bonus you get with the Zulu.
Most powerful kingdoms in Africa.
Fun civ to play with in Civilization.
Their neighbors and set themselves up as a major opponent to European colonization in southern Africa.
Yeah.
The backbone of the Zulus' military was the
one of the more successful groups,
which was reformed under the reign of
where
Shaka.
so many were unsuccessful.
Young men from throughout the kingdom would be conscripted into
against
regiments
European
called
colonialism,
Ibuto, commonly known as Impi. These units would live in their own barracks and all wear.
They have a special unit in Civilization. They're good. They can move great distances.
The same decorative ornaments,
move extra
such as
spaces
feathers or
in the
furs,
game
to distinguish themselves from other impi, and were placed under the command of older, more experienced warriors who acted as officers. The men would act as the Zulu king's military force, but also had policing duties, acted as a labor force, and assisted in the king's hunting parties. Like most militaries, there was an intense inter-service rivalry, with the different regiments vying for supremacy. Fights would often break out, and so long as clubs and other blunt weapons were used, little would be done to stop the altercations. Only when spears were deployed would officers break up the fighting.
If someone was going to die.
2 regiments clashed, leaving 70 men dead and many more wounded.
They're like, it's okay if you guys rough each other up a little bit. Let's just not kill each other, because we do still have to have a job to do, but we'll let you keep your pride and all that stuff.
The most iconic part of the Zulu kit was the shield.
Dude, that thing's so cool.
There are many different types, varying greatly in size and shape, but they were usually made from the hide of the Nguni cattle. The most common type found on the battlefield was called the Isilangu, which was oblong and around 5 feet in height. A slit would be made in the center of the hide through which a wooden staff would be inserted. These shields were durable, though they gave virtually no protection against the firearms of European colonists.
This is where it at this time of the world, when you're talking about the new imperialism of like the 19th century, how it's like you could have these historically incredible warrior groups like that may have so much skill and perfected the technologies available to them. But then you have this new era and this new world show up, like British riflery. And it's like, it doesn't matter how good of a one-on-one soldier you are. Some dude that has no combat experience but can shoot a gun effectively enough can take out your best warrior. You know what I mean? It always comes into mind the Indiana Jones scene where the dude's flashing around his swords, this fancy sword work, and Indy's just like, ugh, pulls out a pistol and shoots the guy. That's unfortunately what it was like for out of this, because the technological differences were so vast, especially when we start getting the Maxim machine gun. That was the killer for these resistance groups.
Before Shaka rose to power, the most common weapon was a throwing spear called an assegai. Though this was still used mainly for ranging a target, it was replaced by a shortened, broad-bladed spear called an ikwa, which was used for close-range thrusting and stabbing.
Okay,
ikwa was a reference to the sound that the weapon makes after being withdrawn from the flesh of a victim.
What?
The Zulu also made use of the knobkerry, a wooden war club that would crush bone with each stroke. They also had access to firearms, usually outdated flintlock muskets that were acquired through trade, though their battlefield effectiveness was limited. Because the Zulu lacked logistics.
In fact, musketry was going back, before this, in the century or so leading up before this, were actually one of the items that European slave traders sold to African tribes in return for slaves of enemy tribes in the slave trade, early musketry. So that was useful and was used in warfare of African tribes versus other African tribes. But they were selling those, but the technology was getting better and better in Europe, where you see that technology they had given them before becomes obsolete to the, generation 2 or whatever you want to call it of riflery or just musketry.
System, the warriors lived off the land, meaning Zulu campaigns were often short and aggressive. This lack of a large baggage train allowed them to move rapidly, covering great distances in a short time.
Okay, that's why they have the extra steps in civilization. They get to go extra tiles and around an extra tile, so basically double the distance further than other ground troops. So their mobility, cool.
Their enemies unaware. It's believed that an impi can cover 50 miles in a single day while on a campaign, though 20 miles was more typical. In order to harness this aggressive mindset, Zulu warfare emphasized on close combat, often using the horns of the buffalo
horses tactic. Too, right?
The Zulu army would advance on the enemy, the head of the buffalo, made up of the most aggressive warriors, engaging the enemy, pinning them in place. Behind them would be the horns, made up of the fastest runners. When the moment was right, they would sweep out from behind the head, encircling the enemy.
Give them a flanking, spanking.
Surrounded, their enemy would either be destroyed or would break formation and be picked off as they tried to run. The final section, the loins, would be made up of older, more experienced, and hopefully level-headed warriors.
Imagine being called the loins.
They would act as a reserve, filling in with extra manpower as required. Using these formidable tactics, Shaka carved out an extensive kingdom in South Africa, becoming a dominant power in the region. In later years, the Zulu kingdom was one of the largest roadblocks to European expansion in the region. In 1879, at the Battle of Isandlwana, a Zulu army destroyed a large British force. The speed of the Zulu advance overwhelmed the British, whose open order arrangement left them vulnerable to the close-quarter fighting that the Zulu excelled at,
keep them at a distance.
Them the worst defeat ever of a colonial power at the hands of an indigenous force. Today, the Zulu are the largest ethnic group in South Africa, making up around 60% of the population.
They wear white track jackets.
The Comanche.
Ooh, okay, cool. So what do you guys think of the Zulu? That was a great story. Able to learn some new stuff, just some stuff I already knew. That was really cool. So yeah, awesome. Fearsome Warriors. All right, Comanche. Let's get some Native Americans.
Of the horse to North America in the late 1400s by the Spanish conquistadors.
Native Americans didn't have horses before
changed the lives of the indigenous people who lived on the Great Plains in the central United States. No tribe utilized the horse more effectively or fought more fiercely on them than the Comanche, whose fighting prowess earned them the name, the Lords of the Plains.
The buffalo.
The Comanche were once part of the Shoshone tribe and lived in what is now Wyoming. In the late 1600s, a large portion of them broke away.
Great place to be good at horseback with the open area. Wyoming is very flat in a lot of it. Well, there's other really beautiful, mountainish places, especially when you get to if you go up to like the west side and northwest with Yellowstone. But yeah, a lot of open areas,
forming their own
perfect
tribe.
for
They moved south,
horseback
using
culture.
horses as the backbone of their new lifestyle, displacing other tribes along their path. Among the most famous of these encounters were with
Jousting.
the Apache, whom they almost wiped out, driving the remaining survivors into the southwest.
Oh, yeah.
Though they called themselves
See their
the
ruins
Muna,
today?
meaning the people,
For the ones that are gone.
their warlike nature gave them the name Comanche, a corruption of an Ute word meaning those who always fight against us.
You know, a lot of the names, I heard about this when I was doing my trip and kind of research for, used to use this word called the Anasazi, which is actually seen as just, trying to use an academic terms here, as like offensive in a way, because it means like enemies and stuff like that, because it was named not by themselves. Because the real term that want to be known by now is like ancestral Puebloans, but it was like Anasazi was a term that was put upon them not by themselves but by another group, and it had a derogatory term for it. So some of those names have come not from themselves but what others called them, and it can be like seen as offensive that way.
Comanche were never a unified people, but rather a collection of numerous bands that lived a nomadic lifestyle, using their
Pretty common
horses to
for
follow the vast herds
tribes.
of buffalo across the southern Great Plains in Texas, Oklahoma, New Mexico, Colorado, and Kansas. In total, around 240,000 square miles of territory were controlled by the Comanche at their peak. Comanche warfare centered around the horse. As one of the earliest adopters of horseback
good
riding,
animation,
they
by the way.
far excelled other Native
giving me a
American
headache, though.
tribes in their riding proficiency, and often fought from horseback rather than use the animals as merely a form of transport.
Rip.
The most iconic weapon the Comanche used was the lance. Tipped with a chipped stone and later metal lance heads, these weapons can reach up to 4
Didn't have metallurgy. Okay, up until those technologies really got, they came in with the Europeans, and at least what I should say is be able to be mass produced. There's instances of some minor metallurgy and stuff, but like the mass production of it is going to transform, as you can see, because you're going from like stone tips, maybe obsidian, you know, if you have something really nice, because like the sharpest of the rocks, but must have been a huge upgrade to then get metal tips.
15 feet in length and could be used from horseback, used one or two-handed to
Who
jab
would
at
win
an
a
opponent.
knight?
The use of such a
One
weapon
of these
was a
guys,
display of bravery, as the user would
lancing.
have to close the distance
Jousting.
rather than attack from long range. They made use of many other weapons, including bows, stone and bone clubs, stone and later metal axes and knives, and then eventually firearms. They also used hide shields. Raiding was a favored tactic of the Comanche. They would descend on the target using their horses to cover long distances quickly. Attacks would be brutal, with those resisted killed outright, while others, especially young women and children, would be taken captive.
You know, when you don't practice a lot of large scale agriculture, you can also become more prone to things like famine, which is often a driving force for raiding activities. As a lot of it's for food. If you don't have the surplus that you may have, that you may not have access to a surplus, and that may be too because your indigenous crops may not store as well. Say something like wheat, right? Something indigenous to the Middle East, and you saw in like Egypt, Mesopotamia, those were indigenous to there and stored very well for long periods of time so you could stave off famine. And those were not indigenous to the Americas as well. So something like large scale agriculture was a lot more difficult.
Though accounts may be exaggerated, they would often torture their captives and would use them as slaves, adding to their fearsome reputation.
Brutal.
The Comanche were so fierce that they were one of the main obstacles preventing Spanish and French territory from expanding further. They fought many wars against the Mexicans, Texans, and later the United States, fiercely resisting any encroachment on their territory. In the mid-19th century, multiple wars were fought against the United States, which were among the most brutal and bloody conflicts between the native tribes and the American settlers.
Tragic.
Their nomadic lifestyles preventing them from being pinned down and a decisive blow struck. In spite of their prowess, they were eventually defeated and forced onto reservations, where their nomadic way of life
Make them do line dances or something?
Today, there are still around 10,000 Comanche, mostly in Oklahoma, but also Texas, New Mexico, and California. The Maori. Maori.
All right. Are these the groups, by the way, that you expected? The ones I was saying, what did I say? Like Romans, Spartans, Mongols. Maybe those were a little bit too cliche to have in a video like this. I actually like what they're doing there because they're making good case for all these groups, but they're not necessarily, I think, groups that are in that like highest tier of most well known by people that know about history. So this has been really, I think, educational. This has been great.
Arrived in New Zealand
Maori,
sometime
New
in the
Zealand.
14th century, becoming the first inhabitants of the islands.
Heck.
Once settled there, they formed numerous tribes. The first inhabitants of the islands.
Yeah.
Once settled there, they formed numerous tribes all over the islands and were almost constantly at war with one another, leading to the creation of complex rituals regarding warfare. Combat is even woven within their creation myths, with the sons of the first deities fighting among themselves, and the pantheon featuring many war gods.
Think about it. For your culture to evolve, you had to be top tier fighters. So it's like the more invested your culture is in warfare, the more likely you are going to survive. This is like Darwin natural selection almost. So it's like the most warlike cultures are going to survive. Therefore, that's why you're going to have this existence of warlike cultures. It's like you had to be, otherwise you wouldn't exist anymore. Survival of the fittest, I guess.
Clans would fight with one another for a number of reasons, including land and
hugging
resources, to avenge insults or to increase mana or spiritual power. Settlements were often the target of attacks, and as a result were fortified into defensive structures called pa, made up of concentric rings of earthworks and wooden palisades.
A maze.
During the seasons for warfare, the tribes would send out parties of warriors, which often numbered between 100 to 140. They were led by a war chief who encouraged the men and led by example, fighting at the forefront, trying to defeat the strongest enemy champion to gain more mana.
It's probably the most important characteristic. If you live in a geography that has this much warfare, that's going to be the most important characteristic of your leader, not necessarily even like for their, whatever you believe their influence in religion is, or their skill with economics or something like that. It's like, no, like your leader has got, if you're going to be the leader, it's because you have proven and demonstrated yourself in combat.
The chief was at the center of the action. Should he be killed, the rest of his warriors would flee. As a preparation for battle, Maori warriors would perform a dance called the haka, which involves chanting, stomping, slapping themselves, and making gestures of stylized violence.
This is the intimidating dance. You might see some like football teams do that, rugby teams. It's very intimidating war dance. It's really cool.
Along with fearsome facial expressions, such as bulging their eyes and sticking out their tongues.
Look up the haka if you've never seen it.
The warriors
look at the New Zealand rugby team. The All Blacks, is that what they're called? And them doing it because they're big, huge, beastly dudes. Check that out, and you can't tell me you wouldn't be intimidated, not just for if it was warfare, but just playing sports against them.
Also carried out extensive tattooing, covering their bodies with distinctive markings, each
Very
one
artistic.
with important cultural significance, further intimidating their rivals. There were many tactics employed by the Maori, including raids on villages, often conducted at night, but they also made use of guerrilla warfare, ambushing travelers on overland routes or by using canoes along waterways. They were also known to use deception. In one incident, a group of warriors constructed a fake whale carcass made from dog skins and hid themselves near a rival pa.
That's dirty.
When the villagers came out to investigate, they leapt out and attacked.
Dude, it's like a Trojan horse, but it's Trojan shark. Which is more impressive? I don't know. What do you think?
The weapons used by the Maori were designed for close combat and made little use of ranged weapons, though they did adopt muskets after contact with European settlers. The patu, or club, was a common weapon, which could be made from volcanic rock or basalt, whale bone, or wood. There was also a long staff made from wood called the taiaha, which was both an effective weapon and a symbol of authority.
Dude, that thing's cool.
Commonly, the Maori would strike at the upper body of the opponent to disarm them, allowing a killing blow to the head. After a battle, survivors would either be finished off or taken into slavery, where they would sometimes be integrated into the conquering tribe. Very often, the bodies of the slain would be consumed, increasing their mana. Europeans
like cannibalism?
First contacted the Maori in the 17th
Not that
century.
That's unique to this. We see this all over history.
Who noted that they were a fierce and warlike. Europeans first contacted the Maori in the 17th century, who their mana. Europeans first contacted the Maori in the 17th century, who noted that they were a fierce and warlike people. In the following centuries, acquisition.
Was New Zealand one of the places James Cook went? Dude went all over the Pacific. Is that one of the places he went? Let me know.
Of muskets led to the Musket Wars, a series of tribal conflicts in which several tribes were
Musket's the
exterminated
game
or
changer,
displaced
man.
from their lands, aided by the European firepower. In the 19th century, New Zealand was annexed by Great Britain, though misunderstandings led to a series of conflicts between the
not before a
settlers
war
and the
had to
Maori.
take place.
During the fighting,
The Maori did not take that line down. They fought back hard.
Maori fought fiercely, their fortified pas proving surprisingly resistant to artillery bombardment and other forms of modern warfare. For decades, the Maori held out until the fighting ended, when they were overwhelmed by sheer European numbers and firepower. Today, the Maori are the largest minority ethnic group in New Zealand and participate in all aspects of society.
Imagine doing the haka for like political debate or something, and you're like Congress. You have one political party that does it, and then they do that before they start their like political debates or delegations.
Famously, the war dance, the haka, once performed by warriors headed to battle, is now a fixture of New Zealand culture, performed at weddings, funerals, graduations, and sporting events. The New Zealand national rugby team,
there they are.
the All Blacks, perform the haka before each game to psych
Look up
themselves
videos
up
on
for
it.
a
It's
match
cool.
and to intimidate their opponents, and are considered one of the most dominant sports teams in the world.
I think, aren't they? Isn't it like not even close? Like their history of success in rugby, is it even like competitive that much? Let me know. I don't follow international rugby.
Any foe can be dangerous, but on battlefields throughout history, some warriors have earned a reputation as enemies you would just not want to face off against.
All right, final thoughts. Don't go anywhere. You know what? This was one of my favorite simple history videos, and I'll tell you why. You know how at the beginning we were saying like, you know, what, like who would we pick? I don't know. I mean, I'll have to look at the comments, but I wonder if any of you picked this, if you hadn't seen the video before, obviously, and you picked these groups. And I'm actually glad that I know, okay, Mongols, Spartans, whatever, Romans, like had such large scale success and defeated a lot of enemies and stuff like that. But I actually like that they didn't go the cliche route of that and went with these other groups that are fascinating and, you know, should probably be talked about more. And in some of these cases, you know, you see with almost all these groups, you know, they don't get talked about enough because at some point they were defeated, right, by, you know, an an army with, you know, well, a lot of these was Westerners with weapons technologies, but like just pound for pound, when you look at it, how incredibly, like this says, fearsome these groups were. So I'm actually really good that they went down this road and brought up some of the less mainstream, you know, groups that they could have talked about. So this was really, really cool. I really enjoyed this. So hopefully you got some value out of me inserting some stuff. And it was fun to give some background information with these and hopefully make it a more enjoyable experience for you. Thanks again for Simple History for making all their great content. You saw that they're really hoping people can get signed up with their Patreon. So definitely do that. I'm telling you, it's going to become more important to support these kind of guys because it's getting more and more difficult for them to be able to produce this stuff at the quality and rate that they have just because of ever-changing policies. So anyway, with that, thanks again for being here. We'll see you all next time.